A lot of people set a New Year's resolution like, I want to read more, or I want to read more books in different genres, but they don't get specific about it. So think of me as your book fairy godmother. I've made a list of 12 relatively recently published fiction books in a variety of genres that would allow you to read 10 pages a day and finish all 12 in a year, bearing in mind that some pages look like this. If you don't want to do the 10 pages per day and just keep going through them, and instead want to read one per month, when I'm talking about each book, I'll also include that information for you. I've tried to make it relevant to the vibes at the time of the year, and to mix up the length and genre so that you don't fall into a reading slump. Hopefully this video will help you branch out into some new genres that you might not otherwise read, and help you discover some books that you might like to keep reading, more books like that one in the future. As you read any of these and like them, please do let me know. I'm happy to give you similar recommendations. On the same note, if you like this idea and want to follow along with this challenge, but you've already read one of the books on the list, let me know and I'll give you a book to swap out for that pick. These were all pretty popular at one point recently, so I'm hoping that you can find them from a friend with a lot of books or your local library very easily. Without further ado, let's get started. For January, I suggest The Midnight Library by Matt Haig. This is a really good introduction to beginner sci-fi and fantasy, so you can see if you like the kind of experimental magic going on in it. But it is set in the world that we already know, so there's not a ton of world building knowledge and information to absorb like there might be in more of a high fantasy novel. It's good for the new year because there are themes of turning over a new leaf and figuring out what you might be and who you might be if you had made different decisions in your life. It's also good for escapism if you might be wanting that around Inauguration Day for any reason. And I think it has that really great adventure feel for when it's kind of grey and dark and you want something fun and an adventure feel. This is the book that got me back into reading regularly because I forgot what it felt like to pick up a book and not be able to put it down and not be able to stop thinking about it in between reading. This one is 288 pages long, so in January you would only need to read 9 pages a day to stay on track if you want to read it from the 1st to the 31st, though like I said, for this full stack of books, if you read 10 pages per day, for an entire year you will have read 12 books. If you finish this one early, feel free to get started on the next book. For February, I suggest Yellow Wife by Sadiqa Johnson. Most historical fiction books are lengthy and sometimes kind of dense with the backstory and research that the author put into them, but this one is short and sweet while still being very well told. It's a good book to test the waters to see if historical fiction works for you before you invest your time and energy into one of those 500 or 600 page works. If you love this, you can stick with what I'm suggesting, but know that this is the only historical book on my list. Plus, I thought it would be fitting to read this during Black History Month in the US because this is the story of a woman who was sold into slavery. Since February is a shorter month at 28 days, I chose a shorter book. This is 278 pages long, so you would need to read about 10 pages a day to keep up. I don't own a physical copy of my March suggestion, but for March I suggest Big Gay Wedding by Byron Lane. If you've been in a room with me for more than 5 minutes and talked about books, I have mentioned this book to you. It's March, spring is being the worst like always, and you might be feeling ready to go somewhere warmer. So we're going to Louisiana. This cover and title to me felt like I was in for a rom-com, but that is not the case at all with this book. This is a contemporary fiction novel if you're brand new to kind of reading regularly. Sometimes this is just labeled fiction in a bookstore if you're looking for other books like it. I do have several suggestions if you like this one. Be warned, it's a little bit emotional. It is a coming out story, but not in the traditional sense of a son coming out to his mother. Instead, it's about a mother coming out to her southern rural community about still loving and accepting her son even though he's gay. It is one of my favorite books I've ever read, and I do talk about it very often. It's 336 pages, so you would need to read about 11 pages a day if you only wanted to read it during the month of March. For April, I suggest Rock, Paper, Scissors by Alice Feeney. This book is very snowy, so I wanted to save it for when the snow is hopefully melted near you and you didn't feel further kind of stuck as a result of it. I also wanted to give you a quick page turner because spring does always feel like it's dragging a little bit for me. More spring slander. Plus, if you didn't like the last book I suggested because it felt slow to you, then hopefully this is a good change of pace It's a very well told thriller with a great plot twist. And if you like this one, you will probably like all of this author's books. I have yet to be disappointed by any of them. This one is 294 pages in a 30-day month, so right around that 10-page a day mark. Though a lot of people do tend to read thrillers more quickly because they end their chapters with a cliffhanger that make you want to read the next one. If you do read it quicker, you can get a head start on the next couple of books since they're a little bit longer. I was not aware that my camera was zooming in on me without my permission. Sorry. For May, I suggest This Is How It Always Is by Laurie Frankel. After a book that had some mystery elements where you maybe wanted to pay attention a little bit more and kind of dive into the details and figure things out, I wanted to suggest a book that really felt like someone telling you a story. And there is a dad in this story who tells a beautiful fairy tale to his children on a regular basis. This is not fantasy though. In May, it will be sunnier outside, so I figured you could handle a book that will hit you right in the feels. We're going back to contemporary fiction for this genre, but with a different voice and style to it so you can start to figure out what you like. There's also more of a family focus to this book, with a trans child being at the core of the story, drawing on the author's own experience. This is my favorite book that I read in 2024. Like I mentioned, this one is a little bit longer. It's 323 pages, but the pages are jam-packed. If you read about 10 pages a day in May, you will be done by the 31st, but you may want to give yourself some extra time in April if you have it to borrow from. For June, I suggest Killers of a Certain Age by Deanna Raybourn. The book choice for May was heavier and more character-driven. You'll hear books talked about as either character-driven or plot-driven, meaning that it's all about the emotional center of what happens to a character, or more about the things that are happening play by play in the story. This is very character driven and this is very plot driven. I tend to prefer plot driven, but some character driven books are so well written that I can't help but be pulled in. Since the last book was very character driven, I wanted to give you an action adventure / mystery-ish book that really pulls you in and takes you along the plot as we follow 4 retired female assassins who find out that they're the next targets. This one takes you all over the world, and it is such a fun read. It is a little bit longer again at 350 pages, so 12 pages a day to read it from June 1st to June 30th. But I flew through this one in part because in my copy, the font is pretty big, and also it just feels like such a breath of fresh air, and I couldn't wait to see what these women were gonna do next. I thought if June was warm where you are, it would be a great book to take outside and maybe just enjoy in the nicer weather for the first time. Either way, I loved this one. Obviously, I'm recommending it. For July, I suggest My Sister the Serial Killer by Oyinkan Braithwaite. This recommendation is short. It's only 226 pages long, so if you don't finish Killers of a Certain Age by the end of June, you can kind of tack that into some of July and still have time to finish My Sister the Serial Killer. If you did finish the previous book, then you can kind of fly through this one in a weekend or take your time with it since it is a literary mystery. Anything that's more literary fiction in nature takes me a little bit longer personally to read. It just takes me a little longer to absorb that language and really follow the story in the same way and appreciate the word choice. With it being only 226 pages, you can read just 7 pages a day if that's what you'd like to do. The title is fairly self-explanatory for what happens in this book, and I don't want to give too much away since it is short. But don't feel discouraged by the back-to-back mystery recommendations. They're very different in tone and have a very different target audience. For August, I suggest Beach Read by Emily Henry. If you're not a reader or you tend to only go for one genre and that's why you're watching this video, I didn't want to coerce you into reading a romance book right away. Romance is definitely an acquired taste and people tend to sit on one extreme end of the love it or hate it spectrum. I'm somewhere in the middle. I have a cap of about 5 or 6 romance books a year, but Emily Henry's annual release always makes the cut. For that reason, I am suggesting Beach Read by Emily Henry because I wanted to give you a romance that still had plenty of things happening in the plot, aside from just the will they, won't they of the 2 main characters getting together. It also has a summery feel to it, so if you're able to take this to a lake or an ocean near you, I highly suggest that. I read this the quickest I have ever read a book because I was laying on a beach, and I have no regrets. It is on the longer side of our books for the year at 361 pages, so 12 pages a day will keep you on track from August 1st to August 31st. For the month of September, I suggest The Wedding People by Alison S. Bach. This book, clearly I loved it, but before I get into it, I want to give you a quick disclaimer about my September, October, and November recommendations. The Wedding People is wonderful and I think you should read it, but if you're like me and you're a perfectionist and you feel yourself starting to get behind because you're going from 0 to 12 books in a year, don't worry about reading all 3 of the September, October, and November recommendations. Just choose one and meet us back in December instead of giving up on the whole challenge. All 3 of them are repeat genres that we've already read earlier in the year, and the December one is the first really different one. I say this because beach read is on the longer end, and because if you're a perfectionist like me, you might get into that all or nothing headspace. So if you want my suggestion, if you're feeling behind, finish beach read, then read The Wedding People, then take a break or catch us in December. Back to The Wedding People. September is Suicide Awareness Month in the US, and that is core to the plot of this book, but I don't want that to scare you away. That is a very sensitive subject for me, and I laughed out loud a lot at this book, and I really, really enjoyed reading it. I teared up once or twice, but it didn't make me sob like some of these books behind me have. It's just great writing, clearly, and I think you'll especially like it if you're in the age group that I'm in, where you're going to a lot of weddings and seeing maybe a different side to some of your friends when they're in bride mode versus not bride mode, because that is talked about a lot in this book. This one is 355 pages, so 12 pages a day will keep you on track in September, or if you do the 10 pages a day throughout the year, you'll stay on track. Keeping in mind the disclaimer, let's look at the next 2 months. For October, if you're keeping up, I suggest None of This Is True by Lisa Jewell. For Halloween month, I wanted to do a spookier feeling book, so I wanted to go back to the world of thrillers. I didn't want to quite get into horror book territory, but if you like this, you should definitely give horror novels a try. I'm a little bit too much of a baby for them, but I like thrillers when I read them during the daytime. Another disclaimer, if you did not enjoy Rock, Paper, Scissors from the earlier suggestion because it felt too dark for you, then this is much darker. So skip this one and read anything by Lucy Foley instead, and then meet us back at a different book. I, however, loved this book, and I did not stop talking about it for 6 months after I read it. It is 370 pages long, but don't let that scare you off. That is a little bit more than 12 pages a day, but several pages in this book are totally blank pages before the start of a new chapter, or recordings of podcasts or Netflix documentaries, so that are much quicker to get through. This is such a good book. It does have an ambiguous ending, so be warned if you don't like that. For November, if you're keeping up, and you will skip this one if you're not, I suggest Dear Edward by Anne Napolitano. It is a really well-written contemporary fiction. I listened to this one as an audiobook, but I am absolutely going back in to annotate this one and learn from it because the writing style was just beautiful. It is a little bit more literary in nature, definitely character-driven, so if you like this one, then you might want to try some more literary fiction books like Sally Rooney and other authors like her. I didn't want to put something like that on this list because that doesn't feel like a great starting point and a great entry point into reading, but I did think that this would be a fun way to get a sense of if you like that type of book. This is about a 12-year-old boy who is the sole survivor of a plane crash that his parents and brother were also on, along with several other passengers, and it jumps back and forth between how his life is unfolding after the crash and what happened during the flight. It's 350 pages, so about 12 pages a day if you want to read it during November. And then welcome back if you're joining us or rejoining us for December. For December, my final suggestion for the year is The Most Wonderful Crime of the Year by Ali Carter. I adored this book. If you skipped the previous couple of months because the books were getting long or you're falling behind, I think that you should still end the year on this one. It is so fun and such a high note. This is a true mystery novel in that you could solve the mystery yourself if you kind of pay attention to the clues. So if you like this, you might like some Golden Age mystery novels, like things by Agatha Christie or Arthur Conan Doyle. And it also made me laugh out loud several times. And it has a romance subplot, so if beach read wasn't for you, you might discover that you like a romance subplot when it's not the only core of the story. It's 293 pages, which is 9 pages a day if you want to read it all month. It is kind of a festive book, So if you want to be done by Christmas Eve, then you can read 12 pages a day to finish it by December 24th. I hope that this list of books has been helpful for you. Please keep me posted throughout the year on which ones you try and which ones you like, and whenever I can help with some more suggestions.